Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question was suggested by a viewer. Thanks to Jolk Polk for this one. Amy wants to use Runaway Together to bounce Nick's Grizzly Bears, but her only creature is an Eldrazi Spawn token. Can she cast Runaway Together, targeting both creatures, and sacrifice the spawn for mana to help cast the spell? Alright, so there's a couple of things that we're going to need to check out to see if this trick works. The first is about sequencing. If you've been a fan of the channel for a while now, you already know that when you're casting a spell, there's a specific set of steps that you need to follow in order. For the question that we're considering, the important thing to know is that the step where you choose targets happens before the step where you pay for the spell's costs, and also before the step where you can activate mana abilities, which is immediately before the step where you pay costs. And that's the time when the Eldrazi would officially be getting sacrificed. I talked about that in my video on Wasteland plus Price of Progress, where it came up in the context of whether it would be possible to activate a Wasteland targeting itself in order to reduce the damage taken by a Price of Progress. So yes, it is possible to cast Runaway Together as described in the original problem statement. The official sequence would be to say you're casting Runaway Together, declare your Eldrazi and your opponent's Grizzly Bears as the targets, sacrifice the Eldrazi and tap an island, and then you spend the mana that you generated to pay for the spell's cost. That is a legal play, but there's still a question about whether it's a reasonable play, as in whether it will have the intended effects. If you've been a fan of the channel for a while, another thing that you might know is that when a spell goes to resolve, if its targets are not legal, the spell will be put into its owner's graveyard and none of its effects happen. This is exactly what would happen in the Wasteland example I mentioned earlier, except that it's not a problem in that case because the purpose of that play was just to get rid of the Wasteland. In this case, though, nobody wants to sacrifice their token and discard their bounce spell to not do anything. So would the bear actually get bounced if you cast Runaway Together like this? And the answer is yes. A spell will only get removed from the stack if all its targets are illegal when the spell tries to resolve. If even one legal target remains, the spell will resolve as normal, doing as much as possible. This answers our original question. Amy can cast Runaway Together by sacrificing the Eldrazi token it targeted for mana, and when the spell resolves, the other target will be bounced as normal, assuming that that's still possible. Let's close out with a challenge question to test your understanding. Amy sacrifices Horobi Death's Wail to cast a Severed Strands targeting Nick's Grizzly Bears. Does she still gain life? Alright, so the first thing we'll notice is that Horobi's ability triggers when Grizzly Bears becomes the target of Severed Strands. Since targets are chosen before costs are paid, this means Horobi is in play when this happens, so its ability will trigger. Once it triggers, that ability exists independently from its source, so it will resolve as normal even though Horobi won't be around to see that happen. Because of how the stack works, Horobi's ability will resolve before the Severed Strands. Check out my video on Bushmeat Poacher plus Greedy Freebooter for a fuller explanation of a similar scenario if you'd like to review that concept a bit. In any case, the Horobi ability will be the thing that destroys Grizzly Bears, and after that, Severed Strands will try to resolve. Except all its targets are now illegal. Accordingly, the Severed Strands will go directly to Amy's graveyard and none of its effects will happen. The same sort of thing can happen with modal cards, especially the ones that allow you to pick multiple modes. For example, check out my video on using a primal command against a treasure token. The potential for this situation to effectively counter such a spell is the reason why recently WotC has started templating cards like this so that all the modes target, even ones that don't make sense to target anyone other than yourself. I talked about this in my video on using misdirection against a Kozilek's command. But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.